Of course, many people, I imagine, are interested in not just drug-based treatments and not Botox-type treatments for treating headache, but other types of treatments for headache that are of the more, so let's call them natural or non-drug treatments. And here we're starting to get into the realm of the kind of herbal and oil-based treatments for headache. Now, I confess when I first started researching this area of headache and treatment for headaches, that is, I found myself approaching it with a bit of trepidation, because when I started to hear about essential oils and about herbal medications and things of that sort, I thought, okay, well, there'll probably be some effects. I mean, admittedly, we've talked before on this podcast about things like apigenin. Apigenin is one of the core components of chamomile. And chamomile is known to make people feel a little bit sleepy and can enhance sleep. Well, apigenin in high concentration can indeed augment sleep. We talk about this in our sleep toolkit. By the way, we don't just have episodes about sleep, master your sleep, perfect your sleep, etc. But if you go to the hubermanlab.com website and you go to the menu and you click on newsletter, you can scroll down and you'll see that we have a toolkit for sleep. This is completely zero cost to access. You don't even have to sign up, although if you'd like to sign up for future newsletters, you can get those. One of the key components of the toolkit for sleep, in addition to behavioral tools and things that are not supplement-based, is apigenin, which is this component from chamomile. So the idea that certain herbal derivatives or herbs or oils could be very useful for improving symptoms of whatever, in this case, improving sleep with apigenin, is not unheard of. And in fact, the data continue to be released all the time that many of the things that we think of as herbal, etc., can actually have quite potent effects. And so while I myself was approaching the discussion about essential oils and, or I should say oils, right? Who's to say if they're essential or not? Oils and herbs in the treatment of headache, I finished out my research on this literature feeling quite, I should say, surprised and as if I need to really check myself a bit, because what I found is that there are certain herbs and oils, for instance, that far outperform non-steroid and anti-inflammatory drugs for the treatment of headache. That's right. There are certain oils that are available over the counter that, when looked at in many studies, meta-analyses, and I'll tell you about one particular study and a meta-analysis in a moment, they show that they can reduce the frequency and intensity of headache in a manner that far outpaces what you observe with non-steroid anti-inflammatory drugs, with apparently none of the same issues associated with non-steroid anti-inflammatory drugs. So I think it's really worth paying attention to. The first of those studies I'd like to describe to you is one that has now become kind of a classic in the literature, I should say, at least for those that are interested in the atypical treatments for headache. And the title of this paper is Effect of Peppermint and Eucalyptus Oil Preparations on Neurophysiological and Experimental Algismetric Headache Parameters. Okay, what does that mean? Well, this is an interesting study because rather than look at the effectiveness of peppermint and eucalyptus oil and other oils on headache, what they did is, because they want to look at the mechanisms underlying headache, which I confess I love, the fact that they want to understand the neurophysiology and not just get subjective ratings of headache, although they did that too, but they really want to understand how these oils can impact things like muscular tension or perception of pain. What they did is they recreated headache in human subjects by using tightening cuffs of the head. They cut off blood supply to certain areas of the head. They basically induced headache, and then they measured things like the EMG, the muscle response at the level of electrophysiology in the muscle, and of course subjective measures of how much people perceive to be in pain or not in pain. I'll give you the broad contour of the study because I want to make sure that it's the conclusions that come through most clearly, and we will provide a link to the study in our show note captions. So what they did is they had people use one of four different preparations. Say preparation one, which includes some peppermint oil and some eucalyptus oil. And all the details about the amount and the relative percentages are in the paper for you to peruse online through the link I mentioned before. So they had four different groups. They had one group apply peppermint oil, but that peppermint oil also contained eucalyptus oil. They had another group use just peppermint oil. They had another group use just tiny traces of peppermint oil and smaller doses of eucalyptus oil. And then they had a fourth group, which was just using placebo. When I say using, what they were doing is they were sponge applying the oil to the temples and forehead of people. And then what they did is they used these different approaches to measure the activation of muscles, to measure pain, and they then induced head pain. They induced headache. So, and they looked at the temporal muscles on the side, they looked at forehead muscles, things of that sort. So they used three different types of pain stimuli. They looked at people's sensitivity to experimentally induced pain by either providing pressure, so this was kind of a cuff around the forehead, or thermal pain. So they actually had them basically heat it up at the level of the skin. And actually, they brought the heat up pretty high to the point where people were rating the pain almost to the point of excessive pain and pain limits. So they obviously couldn't take them to the point of extreme pain. And they had a constriction type condition in which they cut off blood circulation to the pericranial muscles using an inflatable collar around the cranium, and they inflated that to pretty high pressure. So kind of a brutal experiment to be involved in, but look, they're trying to mimic headache. And I think by using these different approaches, they're able to mimic the different aspects of headache and make sure, and here's the key point, that every person in the study is not just getting the same treatment for headache, but is getting the same headache. And that's something that I think gives this study power. It's not the only way to do a study like this, but it gives it a lot of power in trying to understand which types of interventions are going to assist in headache and maybe even specific dimensions of the pain in headache. And basically what they found in the study is that of all the treatments they used, the essential plant oil preparations that contained peppermint, and I'll just mention as an aside, and in other studies, menthol, so these minty type, what we think of as flavors, but are really aromas as well. And as I'll point out the mechanism in a moment, they had the effect of significantly reducing the intensity of the pain. That is, subjects could tolerate the pain far better and experienced less pain subjectively. And the magnitude of the effects were really pretty impressive. Again, I went into all this thinking essential oils. Okay, that's like some really woo stuff. I don't know about that, but it turns out that these essential oils, at least the ones that contain peppermint oil, with or without eucalyptus oil, perform very well in reducing pain. The key takeaway from the study is, and here I'm paraphrasing from the study, that the combination of peppermint oil, eucalyptus oil, and these are basically in a ethanol suspension. Again, people are not drinking these essential oils. I want to be very clear. They are applying these to the skin around the area that's in pain, in particular the temple and the foreheads. Increased cognitive performance. I didn't talk about that, but this is the ability to maintain cognitive functioning while in pain. Here we're talking about headache up until now, just as kind of pain, but that pain can be very debilitating for your ability to work and perform and do other things. So this combination of peppermint oil and eucalyptus oil applied to the skin allowed people to increase their cognitive performance while under pain, and it had a very muscle relaxing and mentally relaxing effect. Mental relaxation was, of course, measured subjectively, but remember, one of the things that led me to feature this study in this episode in particular is that they didn't just say, oh, my muscles feel more relaxed. They actually saw that the muscles of the forehead and temples and some surrounding muscles were more relaxed when people had these oils applied to their forehead and the temples. Not perhaps to the same degree that one would observe with Botox, or for the same extent or duration as one would experience with Botox, but much in the same way, which then raises the question of, well, what's going on here? Is this all placebo effect? Well, no, because they compared to placebo and they controlled for the odor, of course, of the oil that was applied, so that everyone thought that they were getting essentially the same thing, pun intended. But in this case, what they found is that if they applied the essential oil to the forehead and temples, that people experience more or less a cooling sensation, or they could feel as if something was happening in the underlying muscle. Well, what was happening? We now know that menthol, peppermint, and other things that smell that way and taste that way actually have an impact on the sensory neurons at the level of the skin, and can actually inhibit certain sensory neurons and can activate other sensory neurons. Okay, so in order to understand this, we have to go back to what I said at the beginning of the episode, which is that you have motor neurons. These are neurons that constrict muscles, that cause contraction of muscles. They don't constrict them, they cause contraction of muscles. You have sensory neurons, which sense different things, light, sound, or touch. And you have modulatory neurons. Menthol and eucalyptus are actually known to activate certain channels in the sensory neurons that respond not just to touch, but also the sensation of cooling. Okay, so when we think of menthol and peppermint, we think of kind of cool scents and flavors, cool meaning cold. And when we think of things like hot peppers, capsaicin, we think of anything that has a hot temperature, we tend to think of spicy. So spicy and hot go together, and peppermint and menthol and cool go together, much in the way that the gum commercials or the mint commercials would lead you to believe. And in fact, they're right. So what's happening here is that the application of these oils is very likely activating channels in these sensory neurons, including the trip channels, but others as well, that are leading to the analgesic effect by shutting down the heat and pain pathways. Because heat and pain, while they're not exactly the same in our nervous system, they are funneled through common pathways, whereas cooling and pain relief are funneled through alternate, what we call parallel pathways. So the study on peppermint and eucalyptus oil preparations in reducing pain of headache and different aspects of pain due to headache, I think are really important, because they don't just illustrate the fact that, yes, indeed, I'll go on record saying it because that's what the data say, and there are other papers to support this statement as well. Essential oils applied to the skin can reduce the symptoms of tension headache in a significant way, and actually can lead to some offset of some of the cognitive defects seen with headaches. So that's itself very impressive, I must say. It was surprising for me. It kind of put me in my place as somebody who thought, oh, essential oils is going to be like, okay. But it actually seemed to really hold some merit. And when you compare the magnitude of the effect, even though this was an enormous number of subjects, you compare the magnitude of the effect in a paper like this or similar papers on these essential oils to the impact of non-steroid anti-inflammatory drugs, and they really hold their own, and in some cases exceed the positive impact of anti-inflammatory drugs. So for that reason, I think we can look at peppermint oils and peppermint and eucalyptus containing oils, menthol containing oils applied to the skin for the treatment of tension type headache as among the more potent treatments available out there. Now, another